today. I'd like to announce some of the people that are taking part in this program. First, I have to apologize to Larry Juday on the program. I spelled his name wrong. I also spelled Connor Edwards' name wrong. And unfortunately, I didn't know that Walter Skidmore, who was buried here this year, was a veteran. So we don't have his story today, but we will have it next year. I'd like to introduce the participants in the crew.
Harry A. Pierce, Glenn P. Selby, Walter Wales Soul, Milford W. Smith, Cleo Chink Souls, Edwin Sturm, Clarence E. Adams,
Wilbur Keyes, John J. Carney, David Gutchess, Charles Averill, Hector Nicholson, John W. Hart, Martin Bates, George G. Ford, Earl C. Seaman, Charles Shook, Winfred Scott Simmons, Reverend Orlando Keyes, Abram Powers, Robert Henry, Abram Milliman, Samuel Miller, George J. Seedorf, James A. Strong, Ezra Dewey, Seth Simmons, Stephen Averill, John Malloy, Charles O. Weed, Jabez Meade, and Helma Rice.
R. Bailey,
William Paul Thompson,
William O'Brien,
Joseph Purday,
Frank Gedman,
Peacetime and Cold War, Donald Soul,
Richard Soul,
Lee Webster,
Walter Ray Myers,
Ronald Dillon,
We have placed a flag at that gravesite each year since the township took over the responsibility. On New Year's Eve of 2011, I met a young man whose name was Fred Simmons, who at a very young age lived with his sister Amy across the street from my Aunt Eva and Uncle Clyde Roth. Many citizens still remember Fred and Grace Simmons, who lived in the village of Climax on Church Street. I shared with him that since I was elected supervisor of Climax Township, I buy and place the flags on the veterans that are buried in the township cemeteries and place one on his grandfather's grave. He shared with me his grandfather had not been a veteran, and the flag was placed there to honor his uncle, Wesley Simmons, who had fought at the Battle of Guadalcanal. I told Fred of the programs we do at the Gilson Cemetery, and if he could get me the information, I would be so pleased to honor his uncle at that date. With the help of Fred and his sister, Amy Russell, we are honoring this soldier today, with readings from his letters and articles that appeared in the newspapers. A little bit about Wesley P. Simmons. Wesley was born on August 22nd of 1917, and during the hard times of the Depression, although he was born here in Climax, by the time of the war, we find him living up around Hickory Corners. And he's working at AB Stoves, where a lot of our local citizens worked during those years. He worked there from 1937 until he enlisted in the Marines October 22nd of 1941, right before Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt's building up our army. He was a son of Fred and Grace, who was a Nash, and they are both buried here in Gilson Cemetery. His brothers were Edward, who died as a teenager, who rests here in Gilson, Opry, who died as a baby, who rests here at Gilson, older brother William and Lawrence, and younger brothers Private Howard Simmons, who would serve in the Army, 3rd Armor Tank Division, a brother Tech Sergeant Deland Simmons, who was a parachute rigger with the Marines, and Private Leland Simmons, an Army paratrooper. He had sisters Grace Martique, who would name her firstborn after Wesley, and then sisters Dorothy Longman and Marjorie Hartman. So today, we're going to honor Wesley. This man is an amazing man. I went through all the records I could find, and this is the highest awarding veteran from our community. He got the Navy Cross. The only thing higher is the Medal of Honor. So I think it's fitting, I think it's proper And I think it's the right thing to do that we explore a little bit about who was Wesley and what was his experiences. In a way, I think Wesley's story is every veteran's story. The Memorial Day program come out of the Civil War, trying to remember all the servicemen, and we've covered a lot of their stories over the last few years. But reading some of this information, it reminded me of my dad's experiences in Korea. I've heard other veterans talk of World War II. It reminded me placed and dug in Japanese defenses. During the frontal assault upon that strongly fortified enemy Japanese position along the coast, we had 9 casualties, and they were sustained by Wesley's company during a frontal attack. Private Wesley Simmons, with no thought of his own personal safety, boldly advanced in the face of very severe fire from enemy mortars, machine guns, and snipers in the coconut trees in a valiant attempt to evacuate those 9 wounded Marines from their perilous position well forward of the rest of the company line. Although Wesley was severely wounded by fire from a nearby enemy machine gun nest as he attempted to carry an injured comrade, his gallant spirit of self-sacrifice inspired others to follow in his example, and as a result, the wounded men were rescued. His officer, First Lieutenant Walter McKelling, after organizing a volunteer party to advance and evacuate the wounded from the hazardous position well forward of the battery, McElhaney, armed only with a rifle, and while under heavy enemy mortar and machine gun fire, covered the advance and the withdrawal of the rescue party, gallantly drawing enemy fire and silencing that Japanese machine gun nest. Although ill at the time and suffering shock from the concussion of an enemy mortar shell, he returned to the vantage point close to the enemy lines and in the face of very fierce sniper fire, acted as an observer, relaying accurate information made possible the rescue of those 9 men, but contributed to the success of the mission. Another soldier, Private Joseph Hilsick of Queens, New York. When casualties sustained by the 2nd Platoon were left in that perilous plight with courageous disregard for his own personal safety, he also ran out the deadly gauntlet of heavy mortar, machine gun, and sniper fire to rescue wounded comrades. Although during his advance he was stunned by the concussion of an exploding shell,
From the lake, from the hills, from the sky, all is well, safely rest, God is nigh. Thanks for coming.
Please stand arms.
Thank you. Veterans, thank you. Thank you all for coming.